Yep. Good evening, everyone. So, last session we learnt about few built-in hooks, how to use them and handle them. So, in these hooks concept, uh, we learnt about how to use state and use effect. Another one is use context. These three already we know use reference. So, what is the purpose of context? Context is used to configure a context memory. So context memory is the memory created for a component and it is shared to the child components that run within the context of parent scope. Parent scope. That means context have a provider. In that
This
provider
meeting is
scope,
being recorded.
in that provider scope where you are using, there only it will work. Outside the provider scope, if you try to access the context, it is not available. So here there is another technique. Generally in interviews, what they ask is, without context also, we can transport data from parent to child. Then why we need context? And the question is how you can transport. How you can transport data from parent to child without using context. How we can do that? Actually, we have a concept called controlled components. Controlled components. So when you are working with components, we have the concept of controlled components. So what is this controlled components? Generally, it is just like the concept of absolute and relative. It is just like absolute and relative. What is difference? 1 second. So what is the difference between absolute and relative? I hope in CSS like concept also you learned now. Right. So what is difference? Absolute means what? Relative means what? Absolute is individual, independent, and it is not affected by any. Relative means it is relative with reference of with regard to its parent. That means you learnt even in CSS also, we have absolute units, relative units, right? That means absolute units, they are independent and individual. Relative units depends on the parent, depends on the parent. So here controlled components means they are not having an individual behavior. Their behavior completely depends on their parent. That means what they show, how they behave, how they respond, that completely depends on parent. That means parent can control the component. So, for example, in technical terms, it is like function name, and we have a function name and parameters. What is difference? One function is uncontrolled, second function is controlled. Second function is controlled. Controlled because if I access name, it is mandatory to pass the parameters into it. And what is the purpose of parameter? In a function, what is the role of parameter? A parameter is used to modify the function. A function can be modified by using parameters. Without parameters, a function will do the same work every time. And parameter is going to modify the function. It is going to modify the function. That means it will allow us to modify the functionality. That means this is a controlled function. And who controls that? The parameters are going to control. So, what is a controlled component? Actually, a controlled component, a controlled component is manipulated by its parent. Controlled component is manipulated by its parent. The functionality, design, and behavior of component is defined from parent. So a controlled component will not have any individual behavior. That means it will not have any individual behavior. It always depends on its parent. Will not have any individual behavior. So we have uncontrolled components and controlled components. So controlled component is manipulated by its parent. So how you can control a component? Actually, a component can be controlled by using properties. It can be controlled by using properties. A component can be controlled by using properties. So, if a component is having properties, then we call it as controlled component. And how to create these controlled components, we will see. Actually, several components are controlled. Majority of the components that we create for reusability, those all components are controlled components. For example, suppose I am giving you a simple point that you already know. Suppose I say input type is date. Actually, date is a component. What this date component will do, it will show a date picker. It will display a date picker. How to restrict date? I want date to enable selection of dates from September 1 to September 15, something. How you will restrict? How you restrict the date? Into this date component, we pass the properties like min and max. What are min and max? What are min and max? Min and max are properties. Actually, in HTML, we call them attributes, but dynamically we call them properties. So min and max are properties. What these properties do? They control the component behavior. Actually, component is working for any date, but now you are controlling by using min and max. That means you will tell that it will not allow to select dates before min and after max. So what is the purpose of properties? They are used to control the component. So this topic is known with 2 points. That means this concept in React.js, many people know like controlled components and many people know like component properties. Both concept is same. Component properties, controlled components, both are same. Controlled components means the components which are controlled by the parent. And how it is controlled? By using properties. The properties. So why we need properties? Because, for example, let's see one concept here. For example, you have seen so many components in Bootstrap. For example, Bootstrap have components like carousels. It have component like navbars, right? Now, what is the behavior is? I will show a behavior here. So, what is the requirement is? So, I am designing some web page. That means we are designing different projects. That means project A, some project B, some different projects we are creating. So we are having different projects. Now in all these projects, I want a navbar. And in every project, navbar, nav items are different. That means actually what is our requirement? A navbar should look like this. And in the navbar left side, the brand title will come. Brand title is company name, logo, anything will come. And here it will have the navbar have items. That means it will have like home, about, contact, like this it will have. And right side, we will have some buttons like shortcut buttons like sign in. Means you can have some icons, or let's say you will have some icons at the right. I want this navbar in all these projects, but in every project, the title will change, items will change, the icons will change. Then how you design a navbar? In such a way that it can change according to project. Its colors may change, its style may change. That means we need to design one navbar in such a way that it should able to change according to the project. Everywhere navbar behavior functionality will be similar, but what navbar contains is not same. For example, you are using some data, employee data, student data, products data, different types of data. To manipulate data, we want to design a grid. Grid. Grid is used for presenting, manipulating the data. Now, grid is a table. I need to design a table in such a way that it should be able to change according to data. How we design any table in such a way that it can change according to the data, because for student data it should work for students, employee data it should work for employee, but component is same. How a component can work for different, how a component can change itself, that is possible by using properties. And these components which depend on the data coming from the parent, those components are called as what? Controlled components. Controlled components are the components that depend on the parent data. Whatever data coming from the parent, they depend on that. If you don't pass the data from the parent, they don't work. They need data coming from the parent. Without that, they can't work. They need data. So let's see how to design this. So what I am doing is I am creating a new folder in my project. In my project SRC, I will add a new folder. Let's name this folder as custom components. Custom components is a folder. In this custom components, I want to design a new, that is navbar.jsx. I am creating a navbar.jsx. Okay. Now, how to create a component? So component is same, export function, and what is it? Navbar. This navbar component have to return, it should return a simple navigation. I am designing a nav. In this navigation, I am creating a design. Design here. In the first div, I want here the company name. I want the company name. So if you want the company name and that name is not standard, it will be changing. Then how you design now a container which can have the values changing? That means we are not sure what will be the title, but we are sure that title will be here. Title will be here. So what we do now, this navbar is expecting properties, props. So every component have only one props argument. Every component will have only one props, but this props is a object. Object means it will contain key and value. That means it can have multiple keys. So can you have multiple properties? Yes, but all properties are managed by only one parameter. A controlled component is usually controlled by using only one parameter, and that parameter is props. You can give any name because it is a formal parameter. Formal parameter name can be anything, but it represents properties. That's the reason we have an habit of giving it as props. Props. So what is this type? The props type is an object type, and object with dynamic keys. Dynamic keys means you decide what key you want. That means it is not having any fixed keys as of now. You can decide what keys you want. So here I will put an dynamic, and here I will use props dot title. That means now properties is an object and object have a key. What is that key? Title. That means now your nav bar have a property called title. Every nav bar have a property called title. But how to configure the properties? By using props. So it is having a title and title will display here. And the title I will put a class name as font weight bold. I will keep this as suppose font size as some 4, font weight bold, font size 4, that is brand title. Okay. After that, we have another container. In this container, I am expecting menu items, home, about, contact, menu items. So you are expecting, here you are expecting a array. Here we are expecting an array. Array contains collection of items. That means what we do, we put a dynamic and in props. Props is a properties. In that we have a key called menu items. Menu items is the key. And this key we are expecting as an array type. We are expecting as an array. So we are using what? Map. And what we do is we read every item. And for every item, what we want to do is for every item, we want to design a span. For every item, we want to create a span, or for every item, we want to create a link, right? First, I will give a design here. Every item, I need a span. In that span, we will have a link. And what should be the link text? Link text will be that item. That means item will be used as link text. And this span needs a key. So key is the same item. Now here every span will have a class. Some mx is some 3 margin x we are giving. Okay. Now this is the second container. Now we are expecting another div. This is third. Here we want a button. This button is having some sign in. That means it is having some sign in. And we will use some class btn, some it is a button and bi person circle. Something like this we are using. And this is constant. That means this is standard. In every navbar right side I want sign. Later you can design in such a way that they can even hide or they can even show that area. I will tell you that what we call that concept as. Initially, now our navbar component is expecting, suppose you want a logo, then you put an image. That source also dynamically comes. That means suppose we want a logo beside this. So if you want to a logo beside this, what you do? You keep an image. And what is that image source? Image source src. What is the image source? It is dynamically coming from props.logo. It is expecting a logo. And here I will just give width. So width, you can add whatever effects you want. You can define inside this and configure. Now this is a nav bar, and this nav bar will have deflex, justify content between, and the padding is 3. So margin also 2, all directions. It will have a border and border 1. We are just giving this. That means we created a component called navbar. What is intention of this is you can use this navbar anywhere you want with your own content. But every time this navbar is expecting three properties. What are those three properties? One is logo, another one is menu items, and another one is title. That means this component is having three properties. Now let's see how to use it. So I will go to index. Suppose I am adding some component, new folder. I will use like just we will say that controlled demo. Okay. And I am adding controlled demo dot .jsx. So export function controlled demo. Okay. It will return a simple presentation. So it will have a simple presentation and okay. So here I am this control demo. This is just heading like controlled demo. Fine. Let me keep this in the startup controlled demo. Okay. Now you can see the control demo component is here. Now what we want to do is we want a nav bar here. We want a nav bar here. So you don't need to design a nav bar separately now. Already there is a nav bar component. What you have to do? Just you need to use that here. So first you have to import. Import which one? Nav bar. From custom components we are importing that nav bar. And here I want a nav bar. So I am using nav bar. This is our own component, but it is a controlled component. In a controlled component, if it is expecting parameters and you don't pass those parameters, then it will throw error. Because in JavaScript, every parameter is a required parameter. If any parameter is to be ignored, then you have to write a condition for that. If it is ignored, what to render. If not ignored, what to render. Next level, I will tell you that point. Here it is showing an error now. Why? Obviously it is error because it is expecting three parameters. What are those three parameters? One parameter is means property. How you write properties? Just like attribute, title. Title is a property. Na? This is your own component with your own properties. Just like how input have type text, right? You have your own components and your own properties defined. Title is your own. Okay, what should be the title? Suppose it should be the title like shopper, something like this. Okay, what should be another property? Menu items. What should be the menu items? Menu items is expecting an array. That means here we need to pass dynamically an array. This you decide. Either you create one array and pass it, or directly you design an array here. I am designing an array in that home, in that shop. So in that some products. So in that some help, something, or say docs, something like this. So now one more it is expecting. What is it? It is expecting logo. Logo is another property. And logo is an image. That means it is expecting a path. Path. Suppose I am defining some images here. Better you take a small image. In public, we have a lot of images. Suppose I am using a image like some logo PNGs are there. Huh? Like here temporarily I am using that logo PNG. What is its name? Logo 192.png. So logo 192 dot what PNG. I'm using this. Now you can see that a navbar is designed. That means a navbar is created with what you have asked. Now its appearance, suppose I go to the nav bar and here I give class name as font size some 4. That means it will increase the size, right? That means we are creating, and remember, colors, effects, everything you can control. And everybody's nav bar is not same. That means I don't want a nav bar like this. Suppose I will give font size 6. That looks fine. 5. Okay. It looks fine. Now what happens is, now below this, I want another nav bar. I want another nav bar. That means somewhere in another project or somewhere in another component, we want another nav bar. So another nav bar. This time the nav bar title is changing. So what is the nav bar title? Nav bar title, I am defining title, suppose like some fake store, or say this is like some Naresh IT something. And what we are doing here is menu items. Menu items. What are the menu items in this we want? So of course it is having a home and it is having courses and it is having some like new batches. That's it. You can have more, you can have less. It depends on your requirement. So, and we need a logo. Logo is expecting an image. Suppose I am using logo like m1.jpg. I am using this logo and you can see there is a different one. That means a different nav bar with different options. Actually, these logos are huge. We need to set them less. That means in the nav bar, this logo image, suppose width is suppose 20, height is also 20. Just I am giving this 20 width and height, then they will fit like this. That means what we are doing is we are trying to set up a simple reusable component. And if you want to change right side icons also, you can change. I just given only a stable one right side. So you can change. So if you want to change the colors, effects, anything you can do that. Just what you need. Suppose I want to change the color theme for this nav bar. So in the nav bar, in the properties, so this is actually, these are all the classes we are having. How you can add a new class dynamically. To add a new class dynamically, this must be in a dynamic. Class name is defined dynamic with a backtick. With a backtick. If I keep with a backtick, then I can add any value dynamically into this. And what is it? Props dot theme. That means now the navbar is expecting a theme. And remember, what kind of properties are mandatory? All properties are not mandatory. The properties which can return by default empty string, they are not mandatory. You can leave them. That means you see now there is no error. Why? Because that is a class. Class name you leave it empty, then it will be default string, empty string. Such things you can ignore. Now what you can do now here, whenever I want to use the nav bar, in this nav bar, I will use a property. What is the property? Theme. Theme is, I am using BG dark, text white. And you can see this nav bar will be that. And of course, if you are doing such, then make sure that your right side buttons have proper color in such a, or you can control the color of this button also, right? That means in the nav bar, the button control color also you can control. That means this also you can give dynamically, right? Suppose I defined like BTN warning like this, and you can see it will display in this way. Now what I am doing is for the second one, For the second nav bar, I'm using a different theme. And what is the theme? BG, some danger, and text as white. Then you can see it have a different one. That means this nav bar is controlled by the values coming from its parent. And if you don't pass the data into the parent, then it will not work. That means these components are controlled by parent. These are called controlled components. Now, what is interior question is, if we can pass data into a component using properties, why I need context? The interior question is, through properties you can pass data, then why you need context memory? What we are doing yesterday, we are creating a context memory. We are saving some data in that memory. We are accessing the data and using in the child component by using use context. Why you need just pass a property? From parent to child, we are able to send data through properties. Then why you need context? Are you thinking or waiting for my answer? If you are thinking, I will wait. Question understood now? Right? Then what is the reason? Why you need a context if you can pass data through properties? The answer is in the title of our concept. If a component is not a controlled component, then how? Every component need not to be a controlled component. No? That means in a component, you can use child component. Is it necessary that child component is a controlled component? Yesterday we created, or you remembered we created Netflix. When we created Netflix, Netflix index is main. In Netflix index, Netflix header, Netflix section, main, Netflix register. There also we are using a component inside another component, but they are all not controlled components. They are all uncontrolled components. Uncontrolled components don't have property, but they want data coming from parent. How? That means controlled components can use the data using properties, but uncontrolled components cannot have properties. Then how they can access the data of parent and use? And for that you need what? Context. Context is required for uncontrolled components. For controlled components, you can directly transport the data using what? Properties. So here, so this is the question. So, and that's the point here is, yeah. So properties are configured as parameters. Properties are configured as parameters. Properties are configured as parameters. Configured as parameters. So syntactically, we have a function, component, and props. And it will return some JSX. So just return function like, okay. Now here, props is an object type with the key and value reference. So every key is designated as property of component. every key is designated as property of component. That means props dot some title, props dot some items. So props dot some src like this. So you have a component. This component have title. This component can have items and have src like this. And here the key point is property value type can be primitive or non-primitive or non-primitive. It can be primitive or non-primitive. Property value type can be a primitive type or a non-primitive type. So you can keep any kind of data into this. A number, string, boolean, array, anything we can define. So, and one more important, key is a dynamic type. Key is a dynamic type. Dynamic type means, so which is resolved at runtime of application. Which is resolved at runtime of application, not at compile time. Compile time, it will not verify whether that key is available or not. At runtime, it will verify. And while running, if it is unable to find that key, it shows an error. And here, every property is not a required property. So mostly string type are optional. Booleans are mandatory, number is mandatory, array is mandatory. Mostly string types are optional. Other types you need to pass. Because what JSX will do is, into a string, if you don't pass any value, it takes an empty string. But it will not take 0 as default or false as default. It will take undefined. Undefined is error again. So how you define the properties? So this is an example. In this example, so we have done two things. One is add a new folder, the folder custom components, and add a new file, some navbar.jsx. Navbar.jsx. And I will copy that code in that what we have done. This is the code. I will copy this. This is the code of navbar.jsx. And we will use this navbar in some another file. I will give controlled demo.jsx. In this controlled demo, I am using this means we are implementing the navbar and we are configuring. This is what we are doing. So we created one component called navbar and we designed it, and we can access and use it from any place, right? So I created a control demo. Here we are accessing it. And when we access, we need to pass the data into this. So we need to send data into this component. Now, what is the question is here? How to transport data from parent to child? How to transport data from parent to child component? So we have two techniques, by using context and by using properties. By using properties, we have two techniques. So when to use context? So context is required when the child component is not a controlled component, or you can see when it is a uncontrolled component. Context is required when child component is uncontrolled component. So props are required when child component is controlled component. Controlled component. So we have controlled and uncontrolled. So context is used when the child component is uncontrolled. If it is uncontrolled, they don't have any properties. If they don't have properties, then how parent sends data into that component? That is possible by using what? Context. If it is controlled, we can do that by using props. Parent can send data into child by using props. Majority third-party components given to you are all controlled components. You have used controlled component already. If you remembered, you are using formic component, am I right? When you use the formic component, it has properties. What are those? Initial values. What can be initial values? That depends on your requirement. That means initial values that depends on your requirement. That means according to your form requirements, what you fields you want, you can mention. So this formic is a component designed by them in such a way that it is changing according to our requirements. That means it is not a uncontrolled component. It is a control. Suppose all are, for example, we are using a field, and what is its type? Is it number? Is it string? It depends. Do we know we can create our own like that? We can create our own like this. That means, for example, you see now, suppose I want to create my own field component like then it's simple what you can do. You can go to the custom components and you add a, suppose I am giving, let's say control.jsx. control.jsx. So I will give here, this is user control. Okay, fine. Now what it has to do, export function user control. User control is expecting props. Into that we are returning something. So a container. In this container, we are designing here a label. What should be the label text? The label text depends on props.label. That means we will use a label. And here I will use a class name as form label and font weight as bold, like this. We have a label. After this, we will keep a div. Here we are having an input. This input is empty. And what is its input type? Type depends on props dot type. That means props will have a property called type. That input type depends on that. And we will use a class as, suppose class name as form control. I am using like this. That means this is your own control, user control. And depends on what we want to add more. You can design anything you want. Let's go to this now. I will keep here a heading like user controls. Okay. And you can see in that user controls below, I want a date picker, a calendar. That means what we will do is I will use user control. I will import that user control. And what is the user control label? User control label, I will give departure. Departure is a date. What is its type? Its type is date. Then automatically you can see that it is going to display a date. I will just keep this in a div with the class as a class name as a W25. That's it. And here we are adding the user control with the date. That means you can see it will get a date picker. Now what I am doing is I am having another user control. Its label is your photo. And the type I will give as file. Then automatically it becomes a file upload. Later we can add functionalities also. We can write events. That means they can contain events. That means here we are creating our custom controls. We have our own control. That is, so I am using a user control. In this user control, I am using a label. So favorite color. And I will keep a type as color. And you can see that it is going to display that. A color picker. That means you designed one field in such a way that it can change according to that. That is what actually input in your HTML. Input is also a component actually. Understand? That means general JavaScript also have components. We usually call web components, but very rarely you people learn about them because these days we don't use them. Earlier, before the concept of jQuery started in 2006. Before jQuery, we used to design our own controls on. That means we used to design our own controls. Our own controls we used to create. We don't have input type date. Do you know in the beginning of web, we have only three input types: input type text, input type password, and multi-line. That means more than one line text area. We don't have date, email, URL. These are all newly added into web. Earlier, and for every other purpose, we need to design manually. And we used to design components by using directly JavaScript. JavaScript also can create components, but it have a separate library for that. Component related classes are present. By using those classes, we can create component. That means actually JavaScript internally have a library. JavaScript libraries, there are so many huge libraries are there. JavaScript have, so this is suppose component. Components here, it is having a web related so many. So it is having component related so many. That means we will later see so many. These are web related, yeah. They have separate web related libraries. So many libraries are there. Component libraries are there. Actually, in MDN, you can get help, but these days we don't use much. Suppose you go to MDN. MDN is official help of CSS and HTML. That means HTML, CSS, JavaScript officially documented by these people, MDN. These are official. And here you search for JavaScript web components. You can see it is web components. This is JavaScript web components. So web components related. So separate library is present with this. You can create your own component. We can create your own component. This is related to web components. That means I showed you na in the beginning shadow DOM. Remember na? DOM, virtual DOM, shadow DOM. I told you that components have a shadow DOM. We create a shadow DOM for the components. That means the shadow DOM, how to create? We have a shadow root. That means we have the component concept. Examples you can see. You have web components related. So many examples will be there. These are all different components. Ready-made components are present. Earlier, we have to depend on a lot of these concepts, right? And we need to manually design components. But now we are not doing that. We are just depending on component-based technologies, which are Angular and React. Earlier, components are done with JavaScript now. And components means you can create your own element. That means interviewer will ask like, is it possible that in HTML JavaScript I can create my own element? Of course, you can create your own element. That means like input, like IMG, you can create your own element. That means you can create your own element. That means we have, so document have create element na? Create element is there. Actually, we use an option instead of create element, create root will be there, create shadow root will be there, create node will be there. We can create our own items. Actually, we have a window related library. So window library, you can see create so many will come. But it's waste of time even to discuss about this, but at experience level, they can ask. That means if you are showing vast experience, then they can ask like in JavaScript, how you create components. How do you deal with the components, right? But mostly not required. So now we have two components. One is navbar, another one is some user control. We created some user control. I will copy this. You have a user control. This will be changing according to our requirements. This is example. User control dot what JSX. And we will use this in another component. I will just use this area. You can keep it in your components. Anywhere you can keep that and use it. Just the syntax I am giving for that. That means one is date, another one is file, another one is color. We can add this. So now I will show you another little bit complex. For example, see, suppose we will visit a website here. We will visit a website like MUI. MUI later next level we are going to learn this. Material UI. What these people do, they have ready-made components for you. Or you have website like Telerik UI. And you can see they give components for you. And see Telerik, we have demos. We will go to demos. In the demos, you can see they have React demos. React demos. When I go to React demos, you can see they will give so many components. Actually, these are all components. And see, they have hundreds of components readily for you. These are all components. And actually, these are not free. You have to buy them. You have to buy these components and use. These are very costly. For example, you see when I go to pricing, you see pricing per developer $999 per developer. If they have to give access this to a developer, one developer, then this much. But still companies will buy this and use it at high level. That means majority, some companies, they ask specially experienced people, knowledge on Telerik is compulsory because they may be using this very extensively in their projects. That means you must prior work in that, experience people, right? Why? Because these components are different. You can see the components here. You see, these are components. That means what they are doing, they are giving a component called barcode. They are giving a component called QR code. You need a barcode or a QR code, but every time code is differently generated. Right? That means see here, I am having a grid. Suppose I will go to data grid. You see data grid is like this. This is a data grid. That means this is data grid related. That means this is a data grid. I will give this data grid and you can see the demos are there for grid. You can see a grid looks like this. And what they do is you can see the preview. The grid will be like this. This is the grid. If you pass employee data, it will have employee name, job title, and country. And not only that, this is having options like filter, sort. And remember, into this, you pass products data, it will show products. That means, is there any separate grid for products? No. Same grid is used for products. Same grid is used for employee. How? How a table can change itself? That means how you will design a table which can change its headings, which can change the rows, and it depends on the data that you pass. That is a challenging one. And we can try that. See what we will do now. We will try to create a grid. Let's see how we can create a grid. Let's go to custom components. I'm adding a new, what is it? Grid.what.jsx. And here we are designing a grid. So export function and grid and return. So it should return a simple container. This grid, better I keep as container fluid. Okay. And it is expecting properties. Okay, now how I want a grid? We will first basically design. Grid is a table with uncertain number of rows and columns. We don't know what they will pass. Then how you will design? So that means outline we know. Table will be there. In the table, we will have a class like table hover like this we will design. Now in the table, we will have three sections or I will give two. One is what? T head. Another one is what? T body. T foot also can be there. In head, headers will come. Headings. How many? I am not sure. How many fields they pass? Based on that, the columns must be generated. That means in the header, we need a row. And in this row, how many cells will come? How many headings will come? That we are not sure. That depends on what data he pass. Then how you write logic for this now. That means we are expecting dynamic. We are expecting props dot fields. Fields is an array, means collection of multiple fields, and we will use a map. Then what we will do for every field, we will read every field. For every field, we will create a TH. In TH, we will display the field name. And TH will use a key that is what? Field. That's okay. That means now what you are doing, you are designing a table in that the number of fields depends on what data you pass. How many fields you want, you tell, it will create those number of, right? Okay. First, I will show up to this. Let's go to control demo. I will clean up this because already I given this. Now here I'm using a grid. Grid is our own component. Now grid is expecting fields, right? How to define the fields? You can see it is expecting fields now. That means what we are using fields. Fields is an array. It is an array. What fields you want? Suppose I want fields like suppose name. I want field like price. I want field like stock like this. That means this is one, and you can see that automatically the table is generated for that. Okay, fields is fine, but how you will generate rows? How you will generate rows for every record they pass? That means now what I will do here, I will go to the grid. Now here in the body, we need to generate a row for every record. And remember, every record is an object. Na? That means every record is an object with what? Key and value. Like this, what we need to do? We need keys and values. So many keys and values will be there. Now what I have to do is, like this, an array will be there. Am I right? Now what we have to do is, for every object, we need to generate a row. In that row, that means for every object, we need to generate a row. In that row, for every key, we need to generate a cell. In that row, cell must be generated for every key. And in that cell, what should be present? The value of that key must be present. Then how you will map all the keys? How you will read all the keys and how you will display their values? That means I need row to repeat. I need cell to repeat depending on how many keys you are passing. So what you do now here, we are expecting data. That means props is expecting data. The data is a array of objects, map. So, okay, map every item. Fine. After mapping every item, for every item, we need to generate a row, right? That is the first basic. And this row will have a key. That is what? Item. Okay. That means how many items are there? Those many rows. In every row, how many cells? That depends on how many keys this item is having. Understood? That means what is this item type? Item type is an object. Na? In object, how many keys are present? Those many cells I want. That means now how to read all the keys of an object? How to read all the keys of an object? To read all the keys an object, I will use a dynamic expression. We will use object dot what keys. JavaScript object dot keys. Already I explained that. Huh? So which object? Item. That means what it is going to do? It is going to return an array of all the keys. Then what we have to do? We have to map. And we need to map, and this map is going to return every key. It is going to return every key. But I don't want to display. For every key, I need to generate a cell. Understood? A TD. And in that cell, what to display? In that cell, I want to display the value of that key, not key. I want to display value of key. That means what is the object name? Object name is item, item of key. That means it will send the value of that key. Item is an object. Am I right? This object have a key. That key we will pass. What value in that key? It will print here. That means now this also should have a key. I will use key as a key. That's simple. Now what we are doing, we are generating cells also depending on the data. So we need to pass the data now. Let's go here and fields are passed. Now we will pass what? Data. Data is an array of what? Objects. What are the details I am expecting here? One is name. Name is TV. Another one is price. Price is some number. Another one is stock. Stock is suppose true. Or simply I will say available. Available. Like this I am giving. I am defining like this. And you can see that this data is presented there. That data is presented there. And here what we are doing, I am passing another. Temporarily, I am passing all the data here. What you can do, you can create a state in that, store the data and access that state reference and put that here, right? And another object name is some mobile. So this is having price. Price is some price. And we have like stock. So stock, so we are displaying some out of stock. And it is going to display the data here. Now remember, this is actually, this is whose data? This is the data coming from products. Now I want to present employee data. Suppose I want to present employee data, employee details. And I want to present employee details. I will put a grid. In this grid, what are the fields you are expecting for employee? That means the fields we have like what? First name, and we have like designation. Only these two I am giving. And we are expecting what? Data. Data is an array of objects. Employee objects are different. That means we have field like what? First name field. What is the value? That means some name. And second value, that means it is designation. And what is it? Some manager, like this. It gets that and it will display employee data. Table is changing according to the data. And remember, it can have all the functionalities. That means what I do here, let's go to the grid. In the grid, wherever this table header is there, TH, right? In the table header, beside the field, here, beside the field, I am adding, so a button. I'm adding a button and the class name BI. Suppose I given like some dots. So vertical dots. So dots, we have a BI dots vertical. 3 dots vertical is there. That means we given a button here like this. And what is that class BTN? BTN is the class, that is the button class. And what happens when I click, I want a drop down. In the drop down, I want options like sort ascending, sort descending. That means now what we need to do here, usually you can create such things by using what you can do here. I have to design very complex little bit. So this is an unordered list. This is having a list item. So this is what class name. Actually, it's a very little complex one. Drop down. This is having like drop down. Okay, we are having like drop down menu, and this is having like class. This is drop down item. Drop down item. I'm just using a span. So class bi sort alpha down. And we have another list item. And this is having a span, another class name class name. So, and in the class name bi as filter is there a sort alpha up. I'm just using these options. That means it can have text like sort ascending, and it is having text like sort descending. Like this we are adding, but it is not done because you need a lot of functionalities actually. Now when I click, it should open. That means what we need to do. So this have an ID. Actually, it is to be kept inside a container. This entire should be in a container, and that container will have the class as drop down. The class is having drop down, and this drop down databs toggle. Toggle is what? Drop down. Databs toggle is drop down actually. And usually this will open like this. That means we are creating that option like this. Actual alignment is there. This is list item is having a class name called drop down item. Drop down item. Then it is okay. Now you can see this is the list item. That means we are creating, and you see this menu is available everywhere. That means we can add these kind of things. But actually in real world, so that means better this entire field we are defining. So is it having a class name deflex? So, okay, that's not great because it is just having a down one. You can keep in a span. I'm just creating that so that I can keep it just beside. That means we are just adding that beside. And what is the point is you can add more functionalities. That means when I say sort, it should sort by that particular field. But in reality, we don't want our developers to waste time in investing time in designing all this. Because software development is not a talent show. It is business. We don't want to, we don't even care how much hard work you do. We just care whether it is done by the time. How much hard work you do, how much time you spent on it, we don't care. That's business, pure business. So simply they will ask like, why you are wasting time in all this? Already there is a component, use it. But when you go to interview, they will say that design and show me. Obviously, because in interviews they say that you design this and show me. But in reality, they will say that don't use it. So don't try to design it. Already we have a design, just use it. That means your work is business and your interview is testing your skills. So, and in business, we don't want to test your skills. We want you to show your skills and put it perfectly in a faster way. And for that, whatever we want, we will buy it for you. You just use and customize according to your requirements. But you should know how to design all this. These are the concept of what controlled components. Control component. Later, when we bring data really from database and show, we will implement functionality like filtering, how we can handle and design. This is another component we created. And this component is what? This is another component. This is grid.jsx. And we are using that in controlled demo.jsx. In controlled demo.jsx, I am using these grids. I will copy both of them. This is how to design a grid and how to implement a grid. Right. So these are controlled and uncontrolled components. So we have learned this for the concept of how to transport data from parent to child. Now we have another concept is conditional rendering that we will see in next session. It is also very popular for interviews, conditional rendering. These are all interview topics, titles, controlled components, uncontrolled components, properties, conditional rendering. These are interview words that regularly you will face these terms in interviews. Now, what is conditional rendering? We will see in next session. Tomorrow we'll do that. Okay.